The myths. Every year at Easter, we see a predictable list of claims regarding the alleged pagan origins of the Christian festival of Easter and its various traditions. One example is the 2010 article, The Pagan Roots of Easter, by Heather McDougall on the website of The Guardian newspaper, which opens with the claims, quote, Easter is a pagan festival, end quote, and, quote, early Christianity made a pragmatic acceptance of ancient pagan practices, most of which we enjoy today at Easter, end quote. McDougall claims Easter's origins have roots in the myths and rituals commemorating the pre-Christian Sumerian goddess Ishtar, the Egyptian god Horus, and the Roman god Mithras. She also claims links with Sol Invictus, which she describes as, quote, the last great pagan cult the church had to overcome, end quote, and the Greek god Dionysus. Unfortunately, she provides no evidence or citations for her claims. McDougall also says, quote, bunnies are a leftover from the pagan festival of Estra, a great northern goddess whose symbol was a rabbit or hare, end quote, and claims the exchanging of eggs, quote, is an ancient custom celebrated by many cultures, end quote. According to McDougall, quote, hot cross buns are very ancient too, end quote. She cites a passage in the Old Testament portion of the Bible in which she says, quote, we see the Israelites baking sweet buns for an idol and religious leaders trying to put a stop to it, end quote. Then adds the claim that early Christian leaders attempted to stop the baking of holy cakes at Easter, but, quote, in the face of defiant cake-baking pagan women, they gave up and blessed the cake instead, end quote. An article by Penny Travers on the website of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation likewise claims, quote, Easter actually began as a pagan festival celebrating spring in the Northern Hemisphere long before the advent of Christianity, end quote, and repeats the assertion that early Christians chose feast days which were, quote, attached to old pagan festivals, end quote. Similar to McDougall, Travers assures us that the English word Easter is taken from the name of a pagan Anglo-Saxon goddess called Estra or Ostara, as described by Bede, an 8th century English monk. Travers likewise claims, quote, rabbits and hares are also associated with fertility and were symbols linked to the goddess Estra, end quote. The facts. There is no evidence for any pagan goddess called Estra. Bede's reference to this deity is literally the only mention of the name, and although most scholars think he probably didn't invent it entirely, it's most likely he was confusing some information he had heard with some other facts. This is so well known, it's taught at undergraduate history level. Aspiring historian Spencer McDaniel, herself a classics undergraduate, notes, quote, this one passage from Bede is the only concrete evidence we have that Estra was ever worshipped, end quote. McDaniel also rightly observes, quote, the English word Easter is totally etymologically unrelated to Ishtar's name, end quote. Explaining, quote, the further you trace the name Easter back etymologically, the less it sounds like Ishtar, end quote. The word Easter actually comes from the Old English name of the month Ostara-and-the-hare, in which the Easter festival was held. The first suggestion that it was related to a German pagan goddess called Ostara doesn't appear until the 19th century, when Jacob Grimm attempted to reconstruct the name and identity of this theoretical deity. However, no evidence for his conclusions has ever been found. Archaeologist Richard Sermon points out, quote, Bede was clear that the timing of the Paschal season, that is the Easter season, and that of the Anglo-Saxon Ostara-and-the-hare was simply a coincidence. Sermon also observes that there is no evidence for any connection between a pagan goddess and Easter eggs or the Easter rabbit, noting the first suggestion of a pagan date for the Easter hare doesn't appear until the 18th century. This is actually acknowledged in Travers' article, which attempts to connect the Easter hare with paganism anyway. The idea that hot cross buns are a remnant of a pagan ritual mentioned in the Bible is also completely spurious. The description of women baking cakes for the Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah 44:19 is a reference to crescent-shaped cakes bearing the image of a goddess, which are nothing like the hot cross buns of the Christian Easter. Classical scholar Peter Gainsford writes, quote, hot cross buns originated in 18th century England. They are Christian in origin. There is no reason to think otherwise, and no remotely sensible reason to suspect any link to any pagan practice, end quote. The idea that Christians in the 18th century suddenly decided to make buns with a cross as a copy of the crescent-shaped cakes of a pagan goddess from nearly 3,000 years ago requires more evidence than mere assertion. If Christians were so interested in making pagan cakes, why did they take so long to do so? Gainsford also points out that 19th century claims that hot cross buns originated with a Christian monk in the 14th century are completely fictional. McDougall, cited earlier, provides no evidence for her claim that early Christian leaders, quote, tried to put a stop to sacred cakes being baked at Easter, end quote, or that, quote, in the face of defiant cake-baking pagan women, they gave up and blessed the cake instead, end quote, because there isn't any evidence. It never happened. Finally, I'd like to thank my generous patrons: Elias Asvig, June Barnett, Alexander Curzon, Sean A. Young, Andy Chaos, TBLTP, Niels Rethlin, Matthew Simmerall, Thomas Leonard, Martin T., Ben Lindquist, John Larkin, Love You More, Noah French, Aaron Johnson, Emily Cougar, David Johnson, Be the Heretic, Sean M., Waymore Odhi, and Dusty Bob. Thank you so much for your support, and please contact me if I ever pronounce your name incorrectly.